Historians are blasting Pope Francis for praising one of the most brutal and bloodthirsty dictators in all history. Joining us from the Eternal City, Church Militant's Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomez. Jules, according to historians, Mongolia's Genghis Khan killed more people than Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler combined. So why is Francis extolling his virtues?
Brad, Pope Francis kicked off his visit to Mongolia by paying homage to a massive statue, you can see it in the video there, of Genghis Khan. And this statue is right in front of the presidential palace. Now, we know Genghis Khan was a murderous megalomaniac. Historians estimate that he murdered, his regime slaughtered about 40 million people. And the population of China plummeted by tens of millions during his reign. Scholars estimate that he may have killed a full 3/4 of Iran's population. Now, Pope Francis was addressing the president, the prime minister, and dignitaries of Mongolia when he talked about, he extolled the virtues of Genghis Khan's empire. And he said this, I've come to Mongolia as you're marking 860 years since the birth of Genghis Khan. Let me quote now, the fact that the empire could embrace such distant and varied lands over the centuries bears witness to the remarkable ability of your ancestors to acknowledge the outstanding qualities of the peoples present in its immense territory and to put those qualities at the service of a common development. And then Francis actually said this model should be valued and reproposed in our own day. He actually called the period of Genghis Khan's regime a Pax Mongolia and talked about how we need a rebirth of that Pax Mongolia. Now, historian Stephen Turnbull, who's written a book on Genghis Khan, says this. He said the history of the Mongol conquest is a catalogue of superlatives. No army in the world has ever conquered so much territory, and few fighting forces have provoked such terror as the Mongol hordes. And Pope Francis wants a revival of this. And at the same time, he continually condemns colonization. Of course, if it's Western.
Yeah, what about, colonization? I mean, the great colonizer Khan, it's beyond the pale. Pope Francis' statement on Genghis Khan has caused huge embarrassment for the Catholic Church. Can you bring us up to speed on the backlash he's receiving?
Now, non-Catholic historians, particularly respected scholars, don't generally, open their mouths on Twitter. But Pope Francis's statement has shocked so many people that the great historian and, British academic Simon Sebag Montefiore, who's written a marvelous work on Jerusalem, for example, he tweeted this morning, the report of the Times, the British Times, and he said this, the headline said, Pope Francis praises Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire. And he quoted the words of Genghis Khan, "My greatest happiness is to destroy my enemies, hunt them down, reduce their cities to ashes and their beloveds to tears, and possess their wives and daughters." These are Genghis Khan's words, retweeted by Montefiore. Another historian and author, Tom Gallagher, he, tongue-in-cheek, he took a shot at Pope Francis and he said, "By your historical pin-ups, may you henceforth be known." And believe it or not, there were a couple of people who kind of took the side of Pope Francis and said, oh, Genghis Khan's, works, his achievements succeeded in reducing global warming. So, for example, there is this lady, sorry, this is you can't make this up. Julia Pongratz of the Carnegie Institution's Department of Global Ecology, she says, Genghis Khan and his empire, which lasted nearly 2 centuries actually cooled the earth. Now, Father Mark Elliott Smith, who is an ordinary priest from England, again, very cheekily, he shot back. He said, Genghis Khan's greatest pleasure might have been the destruction of his enemies and slaughter on a global scale, but it is comforting to know that he took thought for the environment. Brad, you asked me, why was Pope Francis praising him? Maybe because Genghis Khan, was a great environmental warrior.
I have no words, Jules. I have no words. Now let's switch topics here just briefly here. An interfaith gathering in Mongolia. Francis met with leaders of different sects like the Baha'is and shamans and Mormons and Seventh-day Adventists. Not many Catholics over there, less than about 1,200 total Catholics in Mongolia, so he wasn't meeting too many of them. What was the purpose of this interfaith meeting, and did Francis proclaim Jesus as the only way to God?
If he did proclaim Jesus is the only way to God, like Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, did exactly a year ago in September in Mongolia, preaching to over 17,000 people, that would have been headline news. But no, Francis talked about how, we need to pool together our ancient pots of wisdom, and we want to share with one another the treasure we have received, and basically turned Jesus from the savior of the world into a great wisdom teacher like Buddha or Confucius. In fact, instead of quoting Jesus, he quoted the Buddha, noting that, a saying that says the wise man rejoices in giving, and saying it was similar to Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So yeah, Jesus and Buddha basically are on the same plane, and we need to pool together these great pots of wisdom and maybe make up a new world religion.
Well, maybe if we had someone like Genghis Khan to help us all pool together, that might help. Okay, at a meeting also with charity workers and during the inauguration of the House of Mercy, Pope Francis took a swipe at proselytism, of course. What did he have to say about that?
Right. Now he took a really, strong dig at proselytism. He would repeat this again later on the aircraft. And he said the church does not go forward by proselytism, it goes forward by attraction. He said we need to dispel the myth that the church does social work in order to draw people to itself. Now, this is both right and this is both wrong. The great theologian John Stott, in his book, Mission in the Modern World, Christian Mission in the Modern World, explained why it's so important for Christians to do good works, because he said our good works give credibility to our proclamation of the gospel, and the proclamation of the gospel clarifies and explains why we do good works. And if there is no explanation, we are no different from an NGO, and that's the impression Pope Francis seems to have given.
Yeah, glorified social workers. Jules, despite the very poor record of evangelism on the part of the Catholic Church in Mongolia, like we say, there's like less than 1,300 Catholics there now to date, we heard a very moving testimony from a convert you briefly mentioned. Can you tell us more about him?
Yes, this really moved me to tears. And this is a lady who has no hands and no feet. Her name is Naiden Suren Otgong Gerel. And she says, I am missing 2 hands and 2 feet, but I want to say that I'm the most blessed person in the world because I made the decision to fully accept the love of God, the love of Jesus. She says, when I saw the cross, I saw Jesus with nails in his hands and feet. Why is a person nailed like that, I asked myself. And as soon as I found the answer to this question, I realized that Jesus had been nailed to the cross for me, for love, for my sins. And I felt that this is a cross I should bear and carry gladly. That was very, very moving. An actual convert testifying to her conversion through the cross of Jesus.
Would that those words would be on the lips of Pope Francis himself. On the flight back from Mongolia, Jules, Pope Francis compared proselytism with colonization. Was he somehow unaware that he had just praised the great colonizer, Khan, the greatest colonizer in history?
Well, one of the greatest gifts Francis possesses, it seems that he is totally unaware of the fact that what he says seems to be, almost a projection of what he does or does not do. And you asked me earlier, Brad, what was his purpose in going to Mongolia? And he says, I visit the Catholic communities to enter into dialogue with the history and culture of a people and with the mysticism of a people. Now, why would anyone go to enter into Buddhist mysticism in that country? But to answer your question on proselytization, he talked about how evangelization should never be conceived as proselytization. But then he never explains what evangelization is and what the difference is. He went on to say proselytism always restricts. And then he talked about how proselytization or evangelization should be the opposite of what religious colonization would be. Again, vague statements and nothing very specific.
Okay, another topic here. Pope Francis was also asked about what he thought about the book. The synodal process is a Pandora's box. We've covered that on a previous Rome Dispatch. How did he respond to that?
Now, this is very important because it shows that the book has been given so much publicity, even by the left-wing media, who would otherwise just dismiss it. Obviously, its foreword was written by Cardinal Burke, and that has carried some weight. But the authors are absolutely outstanding in their scholarship and in their presentation of the issues. And this book has been sent to every single bishop in the world. But Pope Francis dismissed it very rudely and crudely, and he talked about how the authors defend a doctrine. He says this, a doctrine like distilled water that has no taste and is not true Catholic doctrine, that is, in the creed. And that very often scandalizes. How scandalous is the idea that God became flesh, that God became man, that Our Lady kept her virginity? This scandalizes. So again, this was Pope Francis's very dismissive response, basically saying that these people who have produced these books are not real Catholics. But what we are doing in terms of the synod on synodality is authentic Catholicism.
Well, we'll like to see how things roll out next month when that synod takes place. Historians really estimate that the invasion spearheaded by Genghis Khan in Mongolia killed more than 10% of the world's population. But that didn't stop the Pope from praising his empire that he built based on that. At least he didn't proselytize anyone. Strange times in which we live. Jules, thank you so much for bringing this story into focus for us.
Thank you, Brad.